Hello, you're listening to Beyond Bossfights, the show with a new topic and a new guest on every episode. Welcome to Beyond Bossfights, Episode 2. I made it to Episode 2, how about that? Today we're talking about girls and gaming. And I have a very special guest to help me through those murky waters, since I know nothing about girls, and only a little bit about gaming. My guest today, this is her first appearance on any podcast, and I didn't know that when we recorded, so I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it, and thank her again for making Beyond Bossfights her first podcasting experience. I think she did a great job. I never would have been able to tell this was her first time being recorded or on the air. Her name is Whiteberry from Laurelin. Whiteberry of Laurelin is what she goes by. She's a Lord of the Rings online player. That's how I met her. And we talk a little bit about her experiences with gaming and in games, and what her thoughts are about some of the more recent kind of controversies about sexism in video games, what the industry can do to potentially improve some of this. It was an interesting conversation. We tried to keep it a little bit light. We were trying to stay out of kind of the rant mode and take kind of a more maybe academic approach to what our own experiences have been. And I do want to say that we talk about a couple of other games besides Lord of the Rings Online, and unfortunately they were kind of in a somewhat negative light. I think we mentioned WildStar and World of Warcraft. Want to let everybody know that we know that is not always the case for those games. We know that there's bad apples in every bunch that can kind of ruin somebody's perception of a game, but all we can do really is speak from our own experiences, and I think that's what we do. The other thing is, it kind of sounds like we spend a lot of time talking about Lord of the Rings Online, and that's probably true because that's where a lot of our experiences have been. So there was one thing that I kind of wanted everybody to maybe chew on as we listen to this topic of conversation, because it interested me as I was going through the discussion with Whiteberry. I find it extremely interesting that many of the female Lotro players that I've spoken to consider that game one of the safest gaming environments they've ever encountered. Now, this is a game with a very conservative and agreed upon set of moralities based on Tolkien's lore. And while some might think that personal freedom to define one's own morality leads to happiness, an established universal truth in this case actually leads to a more equal, fair, and fun atmosphere for all involved. I just found that extremely interesting and perhaps even a little counterintuitive. Hope you enjoy the show. So today our main topic is girls and gaming, and I know this can be kind of a charged topic, but I have somebody here with me that I think can help us navigate the choppy waters. Those of us in the Lotro community are very familiar with this person, but those of you who are not in the Lotro community may need an introduction. My guest today is Whiteberry from Tales of Arda fame. She has a very, very good fan site for Lord of the Rings Online called Tales of Arda, and does all kinds of neat things there. Cosmetics, completionist tracker, spreadsheet for all of the quests and things and deeds that you need to do in the game. There's fun quizzes there, and it's just a really well-designed site. So, Whiteberry, thank you for being with me today.
Oh, and thank you for letting me come.
I appreciate you. And one of the things I found in trying to record my second episode is that it is very, very difficult to schedule a guest that is 7 hours outside of your time zone, because your schedules never really seem to coincide.
Yeah, it can be a bit tricky with the time zones, yeah.
Adding to that is the fact that we've both been battling some sickness in the last couple weeks too. So if my voice sounds a little bit strange, just know that I've got my tea here and I'm going to try and power through. So, Whiteberry, we started something in the last episode that was kind of unintentional, but it ended up being kind of a nice way to bring the guest into the conversation, and that was the definitive gaming history of the guest. And so I know that you play Lord of the Rings Online now and that you're very involved in the community, but could you tell us a little bit about where you started and how you got to where you are from a gaming standpoint?
Sure. I haven't actually played that many MMOs, but I have always played games, role-play games and strategy games. And very briefly, then I've started out with sort of like Sierra Space Quests and Sherlock Holmes and Monkey Island and such, and SimCity Civilization, Settlers, that type of games. And then in the late 90s, I was introduced to a multi-user text-based game called Multi-User Middle-earth, which was Tolkien-based. And I had, of course, read the books, Tolkien's books at that point, but this really got me into Tolkien, and really made me love his work, experiencing it in a game. And from there on, I got to my first MMO, Dark Age of Camelot.
Okay.
Which I think it still exists, but I think they haven't updated it in like 7 years or something. So, yeah. And I have tried Diablo and World of Warcraft, but I only lasted a couple of weeks there. Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people, at least in the Lord of the Rings online community, say that they started in the Dark Age of Camelot game, and I've never played that game, but it sounds like it's kind of been a gateway into these Tolkien-esque fantasy type games, so that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't actually know anyone or play with anyone who I know from Dark Age of Camelot as well, but I know a lot of people that are in Lotra now that had played there as well.
And so that brought you into being interested in Tolkien, and you discovered Lord of the Rings online how many years ago?
Well, I started actually in I think in 2003 or something. There started being rumors of a Tolkien MMO being built. And I waited for 4 years for this before it actually launched. I was really, really into it, and I started playing from day one. At that point, I hadn't actually been doing a lot of MMOs, so I didn't dare sign up for beta or anything. But I started from day one. Yeah. It was a very magical moment for me stepping into the Shire for the very first time.
So, is that pretty much your main game to this point still?
Definitely. I have signed up for alpha testing of Camelot Unchained, and that's like in August this year that the alpha starts. I think they just started internal testing. I'm very optimistic about that. It's mostly based, as far as I know, on PvP and crafting and like realm against realm. So it's a bit like Dayak was. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the reason that we decided to pick this topic for today, or one of the reasons, was because it's girls in gaming has been kind of a hot item here in the last few weeks, and one of the bigger stories that came out a few weeks ago was in relation to WildStar, which is a game that is not yet released but is in beta testing. And so to give a little background from what I know, which is not very much because I'm not involved in the beta, is that there was kind of an outcry over one of the races in WildStar being a little too exaggerated in certain ways. And WildStar actually took that feedback and adjusted their character models accordingly. So, and there was a Massively article that kind of addressed it, and I pulled a quote out of it. It was by Elliot Lefebvre. He said, "This is not to say," he's reviewing the game here, "it's not to say that the game is actively sexist. Male and female Makari, which I think is the race, are both consistently portrayed as being cunning, intelligent, manipulative, and capable. They spend a great deal of time helping both male and female explorers. There's an extended sequence in the early exile areas involving a pregnant woman which raised my eyebrows once or twice, but it didn't trip anything over into rant mode. But it's passively there, which means there's no one on the team that was trying to be sexist. They just weren't trying not to be. And this is kind of it's a very interesting, I think, case study of the gaming culture and the game development culture. I didn't want to really dwell on this podcast on the sexism part necessarily, but there's definitely some interesting angles we could take in looking at how males and females approach games and how they feel when they're in a game. And so I wanted to kind of talk about your experiences and compare them with mine and see if there was any interesting conversation to be had there.
Okay.
Start out, I guess I was curious as to whether you play exclusively male or female characters, or do you mix it up a little bit? How does that usually work for your games?
Well, I tend to play female characters, simply because I almost always roll characters on roleplay servers, and it's just easier for me to play female characters. It's closer to home.
Right.
I do have 2 dwarves in Lotro that I play, which are both males, and I found it actually quite interesting and maybe a bit easier to roleplay those because, I can scratch myself in odd places and such. I actually really enjoy playing them, and they are much more role-playing characters than my other characters are, funny enough.
Yeah, I like one of your dwarves quite a bit. I've seen his videos. So, and as for myself, I play exclusively male characters, probably for the same reason that you describe, except I don't really do a lot of role playing with them. I think the extent of my role playing is when I write fan fiction for the Lotro Players site. That's about as far as I've gotten with actual role play, actually getting into a character and trying to see through his eyes. But I think it's for the same reason. That's something I gravitate towards. And interestingly enough, I play with my wife, and she plays all female characters. So it's just kind of the way it seems to work here. And you mentioned dwarves, which is a funny kind of gray area, I think, in that specific game, because there's no real, for those of you who are not familiar with Lord of the Rings Online, there's no real option to create a female dwarf on the character creation screen, but a lot of people will roleplay their dwarves as females because supposedly in Tolkien lore they're so physically similar that you can't tell them apart. So occasionally you'll run up against a dwarf with a big beard that says, "I'm a female dwarf." And you just go along with it.
Yeah, you do see a lot of dwarves in dresses. And I think it's also a bit of a protest, because in the start in Lotro they actually named the dwarves as being male, and you couldn't create female ones. So yeah, I think some also just do it to be a bit, funky.
Right. So, generally speaking, do you think that women and men respectively gravitate towards certain kinds of games, or is gaming just gaming all the way around?
I think, and of course this is really generally speaking, I think that women tend to relate more to the characters they build, and build like rich stories around their characters. And I think that's why Lotro is so popular with the ladies, I think, because you actually have some really, really nice background stories that you can build on, and also I think it's also popular because it's not exaggerated. I know that it's a fantasy world, but I think they actually pulled off doing it really realistic, both in the environment and in characters. So I think it might just be easier for women to relate to the characters and role play them there. I know that not everyone role plays, but I think, yeah, for me at least, I'm more comfortable with Lothar than World of Warcraft, for example, because I feel I can relate more to the character and it's more me.
Okay. It's interesting because my kinship in Lord of the Rings Online is about half men and half women, and when I started in the kinship, it was actually kind of heavily weighted towards having more women than men. It does seem like you run into a lot of women who play that specific game, and I don't know if it's because it feels like a safer gaming environment than others, or what the deal is. So who do you think is responsible for kind of creating this safer gaming environment? Is it the players in the game, or should the game itself be responsible for kind of fostering a safer environment?
Do you mean who I feel should be sort of responsible for it?
It's kind of a philosophical question, I guess. What I'm getting at is it the players that are to blame for some of these more hostile gaming environments, or is it the game itself that kind of fosters this environment and draws these players in? Kind of a chicken or egg question.
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that it's a mixture of both, really, because if you have some sort of game like I don't know, PlanetSide, for example, then you know that it will be a lot of males, it will be a lot of young males as well. I haven't actually played PlanetSide other than a couple of hours, so
Yeah.
but you know what I mean.
Yep.
I think the game attracts a certain group of people, or a special target of age and sex, and I just think that it's like going into a pub that's all men. I mean, it's not that different, is it?
Right.
If you go to a place where there's all males in there, you know that it's going to be a different environment than if you go to the hair salon with all women. To be really generalistic in my examples.
Right. I think it's probably appropriate here to pause and say that we are going to make some general statements in this podcast.
Yeah.
We know there's exceptions to every rule, but at the same time, statistically speaking, men tend to gravitate towards certain things and women tend to gravitate towards other things that are sometimes different. So don't send us hate mail because you're someone who enjoys what we would typically maybe throw under one sex or the other. So I just kind of a side note here. I've been thinking about, the responsibility factor, and it seems like...
Yeah, I didn't really answer that, did I?
Well, that's okay. It's more of a thought-provoking question than one that probably has a real answer anyway. So it's kind of a fine line, because obviously there is an aspect of marketing that is proven with I'm going to call it kind of cheap tricks, but it's not really cheap tricks. It's just a proven marketing method that if you do a certain thing, you're going to attract a certain number of people in a certain market segment into your game. It's interesting. I was just listening to a podcast last night by Rhett and Link called Ear Biscuits. It's their weekly podcast that they do, and they were talking to a gamer who has a YouTube channel. Her name is Dodger Lee, and I think her channel is called Press Heart to Continue. And she basically said early on in her YouTubing career, her gaming YouTubing career, she made the decision to not kind of follow in the footsteps of some of the other girl channels that were out there, not disparaging them in any way, but she was not going to point the camera in a way to accentuate certain things that would draw in a male audience, as she was playing the games. And she said, I talked to some of my male friends about that because it was a conscious decision. And they said, yeah, I would definitely watch your channel if you did that, but I might not respect what you were saying as much. And I guess
Yeah.
I kind of liken that to the decisions that some of these games make as they launch, right? They can cheapen themselves and bring in a certain number of players and a certain type of player to be introduced to their game. But does that player actually respect the game for what it is? Or are they just there because they saw the eye candy to begin with, you know?
Yeah. And I think that you're very spot on there, because you have I think in Lotra at least, as I said, the characters are very realistic. You don't have the avatars having, I don't know, FF breasts and such. Can I say that? I hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure you can.
um, okay. Um, and you don't have the males all buffed up like, whatever. But it's and I think that's one of the reasons as well that Lotra suits me. Um, I saw some screenshots from other games. I think it was actually Wildstar, and I must admit that alone just made me sort of dismiss it without even going to their site or anything. Just
Interesting.
thinking, okay, that's not me at all.
Uh-huh. So that is interesting to hear that is actually, was it the exaggeration of the character models, or was it the art style, or what was it?
Well, it was the characters mainly, and it was because the screenshot I saw was this very small lady with very, what do you say, very curvy,
Okay.
and behind her was this big male who was like 4 times her size or something. And I was just looking at it, and I knew what kind of community it would be, and I just wasn't interested in that. Yeah.
So you hear that, Wildstar? This is a market segment you're turning away.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going with that. And I know we're spoiled within Lord of the Rings Online because there's also a certain sense of if you look at the cosmetics that are available, they're actually very modest in comparison to a lot of the games out there, I think. There's no way, with the exception maybe of the shirtless dwarf cosmetic, that you can really show a whole lot of skin in that game.
Yeah, I really like, well, no surprise there for those who know me, I guess, but I really like the cosmetic system in Lotra, and it is really modest. You don't even have bare legs or anything. It's it's very appropriate for Tolkien's lore, I think, and I appreciate that. I'm really happy that they haven't cheapened it over the years.
It does make you wonder, though, if the lore wasn't a consideration, if a long time ago Turbine would have gone another way with some of the cosmetics in order to draw in a larger audience.
Yeah, that's something for speculation, but yeah, I think they're doing a pretty good job trying to stick to the lore.
Okay, so going to some of your personal experiences, have you encountered sexism in games that you've played in the past?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have encountered it a lot, to be honest. I think that, and it's also, it's also how you take things, because there will be sexism in all games where there's both males and females. Um, and I think that it's easier for me to just laugh at it and then move on, than to make a big deal about it. Yeah, it just makes it much more fun to play if you don't take every single thing as an affront to your gender. Um, let's see if I examples. I played one of the reasons I only played World of Warcraft for a couple of weeks is actually I rolled a player on a role-playing server, a female character, and there were actually people or players standing there waiting for new players to turn up and then just troll them for cybersex. And that was really discouraging.
Sounds like kind of a hostile environment, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think they actually cared whether you were female or male in real life. But yeah, and then I just found the avatars and the dances and stuff extremely vulgar as well. So yeah, I didn't last long there. I think in Lotro it's because there are so many women in Lotro, it's not like it's not really that that often that I see something like this in Lotro. Yeah, it's a more mature player base in Lotro, I think, and there's always something like. In PvP especially, not that I've spent a lot of time in the Edmores, but when I have, and if I have been on voice chat, then more than once it's like, oh my god, it's a girl, and then it's all silent. So it's, yeah.
That's kind of self-policing at least, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But sometimes it's also just been in fun. Just to, make fun of it from the other players.
So I've noticed in following you on Twitter and some of the screenshots that you post that you seem to really roll with things pretty well. That's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on for this topic, is because you seem to realize that there is a problem, and yet you choose to deal with it in a way that doesn't really let's see, how can I say this, doesn't encourage that problem to follow you around.
Yeah, I hope so, at least. It's not really a conscious thing, but I have it. Sometimes it can be difficult to deal with because some people get a bit creepy when they do know that they aren't supposed to just ask me outright if I'm a girl in real life, but then they try to do it in what they think is a subtle way, and that bothers me a bit. It's people who just start talking with you because you're a girl,
right?
But yeah, I think most of the time I just laugh at it and try to make it into something fun, and people get the hint. Of course, there's always some people who are more dense than others.
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked. You hit on a little bit about the maturity level of the community, and I think it probably does vary game to game. I know when I used to play first-person shooter multiplayer, I wouldn't say that it was a necessarily hostile environment to females, but it was just a hostile environment, period. It's kind of that type of game seems to attract, like you said, kind of younger male, full of testosterone, going to go shoot them up. And so it was just kind of overall hostile. The language and the gamer tags and everything else, you had to kind of desensitize yourself from some of that. Especially if you were like me and you weren't very good at the game, you got a little bit of abuse thrown at you every once in a while.
Yeah.
And especially even from your teammates, especially from your teammates. But yeah, it's interesting how different games attract different kind of demographics. And MMOs, they say that it's an aging demographic, so I wonder if this is a problem that's going to kind of go away, or is this a problem that's exacerbated by the fact that a lot of the MMOs have gone free to play and anybody can just jump in and create a character now?
Well, yeah. I think there will always be all sorts of ages in MMOs, no matter which MMO it is. Well, I don't know about Hello Kitty or something, but you know what I mean. World of Warcraft, Lotra, Wildstar, and such. You will always have a broad sort of target group or group that plays it, but I don't know if. Yeah, I really have no thoughts of whether it's the player base is getting older for MMOs. What do the young people do then? I don't know. Play football.
So this is an interesting
Sorry.
interesting question that you actually brought up for the show, and the question is, do you see reversed sexism towards guys? And I don't know if this is a question that you wanted to answer, or if this is a question you wanted to ask me.
Go ahead and answer if you can.
I haven't seen a lot of this in my experience. I would say probably the only thing that would come, I don't even know if it really qualifies, but because of the attention on sexism in MMOs lately, it seems like there's kind of a lot of people that are very, very passionate about this subject, and I think sometimes as a male, you can read a lot of these, which are very legitimate points about the problems in the industry, and you can go, boy, they're really picking on me, and really it has nothing to do with me, right? Because I feel that I conduct myself in a way that's not hostile towards females in games, and I better, because my wife is usually sitting right next to me when I'm playing. But you kind of see all these and you go, wow, this is very kind of a hostility towards the males in the industry, and you I don't know. It's not offensive necessarily, but you just certainly take notice of this, and maybe that's just a product of the fact that I'm not used to seeing. I'm used to being in the majority, so it's different for me to actually see so much on the other side of things, being the female side that is trying to have a voice in this traditionally male-dominated industry. So I don't think that's necessarily a reverse sexism, because it's probably needed at this point. It's one of those things where when there's a problem, you need the pendulum to swing pretty far in the other direction to move things closer to center. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that and this is in in general outside games as well, that we're really focused on being politically correct, so that sometimes I think the males get a bit more bashing than is needed
Yeah.
for what they do, because I mean you can see sexism in everything if you want to, but it's like these days, if women bring it up, then they are automatically right. And I think that's a bit of a pity, because I don't know if it's reverse sexism, but it's at least taking advantage of your gender from the female's point of view.
So this is a question that maybe we should have started with, but but I think it's still relevant. What have you noticed as the most common gender stereotypes in games?
Well, for females, I think that there's a very often used stereotype called or what I call the attention seeker, where people think, where people think that females or women play games just to get attention. Because it's of course, if you go to a game where there aren't a lot of women, and you are one, then you will get a lot of attention, both good and bad parts. at least I experienced that in Dark Age of Camelot. We weren't a lot of women there, and it was like if you had a group of 24, then one or two of them would be women. So that was actually something there. Usually you could just sort of hide because no one used voice at that point. Yeah, it was really odd sometimes, and yeah, I think that's definitely a stereotype that you get labeled as an attention seeker. Is a nice word for it. If you're a woman, and especially if you stress that you're a woman, and a lot of women as well use it to their advantage in games, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe not a lot, but some do. Like I saw a couple of weeks ago, I was standing in Mikkeldelving in Lotra, and someone was looking for a group, and she wrote in the chat channel, looking for group channel, that I'm a girl looking for someone to help me with this quest.
Okay.
I mean, that's so sometimes I can understand that people actually think, oh, okay, but yeah, that's the most common one I've seen for women, I think. And yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was going to say probably the ones that I've noticed and am at times guilty of is assuming that the folks who are playing who are interested in cosmetics and the music system and role playing are the female people that are playing those characters. And I know that's not always the case, but that's something that you see. I think you see a lot of, and that's probably what kind of taints your view of that. And music is a little different because it's kind of universal. I think in Lotro, because it's one of the only games with a music system, there's a lot of really talented musicians of both sexes that flock to that. But because they're kind of grouped with role-playing events and, you know, the dressing up and all that, it kind of goes back to the old stereotype of girls playing with dolls, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I guess if you got right down to it, even guys and girls going on raids are really kind of playing with dolls when they're playing their characters. They're just dressed differently, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I've noticed, I think. How about the other way for guys? Are there gender stereotypes for guys playing games?
Definitely. I think from you have the guys that are where, from my point of view at least, and maybe from many women's point of view, you have the guys that are the PvMPers, like the buffed up macho here I come players who just want to kill everything in sight, basically.
Yeah, I heard a term for that this week. That somebody called them the dude bros.
That's a good term, actually.
Yeah.
I don't actually know any of these people. I've seen a couple of over the years, but I've never actually been in kinship or something with any of them. So I'm not actually sure if they exist in real life or if it's
I think
if
they
it's
do.
just okay.
I think they do.
But I don't know them, but that's a stereotype, of course.
Right.
And then you also have the sort of the heroes who want to save everyone, especially the women, who are the heroes and helpers and such. And I think that's a common stereotype as well.
And the most important question of the night. This may be a stereotype as well, or an urban legend, perhaps. Do girls really get more stuff from other players?
Well, I I can only sort of relate to myself, of course. And I think that girls are just better at asking for stuff. Generally, I mean, it's like asking for the way home or something.
Right.
Where,
For directions, yep.
yeah, exactly. Where men, they like to do it all themselves and, be the providers, and women just, oh, can someone help me with this? They're much better at asking for help.
I have never thought of that. I think you might be right.
I think so, yeah.
In fact, when I started playing Lord of the Rings Online, I created enough characters so that I could have a crafting profession on every alt, so I wouldn't have to ask anybody for anything else. So I think you're onto something there.
Yeah, I think that's in our genes somewhere. So, but yeah, I think that some do also get more stuff really, because it's people are more friendly towards, or I should say, males are more friendly towards females than they are towards other males. I think in very general, of course.
Well, the old joke is that there are males that create female characters specifically to get more stuff from other players. So.
Oh, I think that's a myth. Everyone I've spoken with, where I ask why they play female characters when they are males themselves, they say it's a boob thing. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it's a myth that they try to get more stuff. Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of wraps up our discussion, unless you had anything else you wanted to throw in about this topic.
No, I don't think so.
Surprisingly to me, after recording my first episode last month, I actually got some feedback. So I was going to read that out loud because it pertained to the topic that I discussed with Andang, which was, as a reminder, will we outgrow gaming? And this feedback comes from Randolph, and he said, speaking of the topic of discussion, it was especially pertinent to me as I'm a middle-aged gamer myself. I guess I am middle-aged. Boy. Thanks, Randolph. I'm middle-aged with you. If you'd like my 2 cents worth on the topic, I don't see us growing out of gaming. I'll be gaming in one form or fashion until I can't anymore. I'm pretty sure of that. It's certainly not a maturity thing. I think about gaming fairly constantly, and I can't imagine that changing or being replaced by something else. My mother is 80, and she learned how to play bridge in her early 20s. She's played it all of her life and still plays it 3 times a week at her local senior center. Just swap out bridge with video games, and I think that's going to be my life story as well. Thanks, Randolph. I agree with you. I think that's kind of the conclusion we came to last week with Andang. So at this point, I guess I would turn it over to you, Whiteberry, to go ahead and give out any contact information you'd like the folks to have.
Thank you, and well, thank you for letting me be here today as well.
Oh, thanks for coming. It was awesome.
Yeah. Well, I have a website called Tales of Ada, and you can go to it on talesofada.com. And I have a Twitter account as well called ToArda, ToArda, at Twitter.
I would highly recommend following her Twitter account at the very least, because I get a lot of my information from Whiteberry that I retweet. A lot of good information there if you're a Lord of the Rings Online player or fan at all. And if you'd like to get in contact with me, I am Braxwolf. My Twitter account is @Braxwolf, BRAXWOLF. You can email me at braxwolf@gmail.com, or you can visit my blog at braxwolf.wordpress.com. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in for episode 2 of Beyond Boss Fights, and I hope to see you next time.